Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of Coast Connections. It's our pleasure to have with us today Rachael Merrett from the Georgia Strait Alliance. Rachael is the Species Protection Coordinator with the Georgia Strait Alliance, and the Alliance has been working here on the coast for the last 30 years or so, helping to protect the marine ecosystem here. We're going to learn a little bit more about that tonight. Welcome, Rachael.
Well, thanks for having me.
You're also known as the Orca Defender and the Orca Angel.
Yeah, sure. I'll go by those.
Now, Rachael, how did a girl from Saskatchewan from the wheat fields end up being an Orca Defender?
Well, when I was a kid, I used to spend every summer in Vancouver with my aunt and uncle. So when I first saw them, I was 6 years old, and something happened, and they became the loves of my life. And I got off that plane in Saskatchewan, and at 6 told my dad, I need to be a marine biologist because I love killer whales. And so that was my path since I was 6, and that's where I am today.
Fantastic. That's beautiful. Yeah. And who, among us isn't moved when we see an orca out in the wild? Like, it's such a magnificent experience. It's almost like a spiritual experience when you see these beautiful marine mammals.
Absolutely.
Yes. And so you also ran a whale watching, did whale watching tours for a while?
Yeah, I have a background in the whale watching industry for 8 seasons. So I was definitely able to get to know the whales individually and use that platform to educate people from around the world about the species and talk about why we need to protect them.
Let's talk about that. What are some of the threats right now that the orcas here, our resident orcas in the Georgia Strait, in the Salish Sea, what are some of the threats they're facing, Rachael?
So the southern resident killer whale population is down to 76 whales. And the 3 categories of threats that we talk about when we are discussing whales are prey availability and abundance, because they prefer to eat Chinook salmon, vessel disturbance and noise pollution in our oceans, and toxic contamination in the environment, which is affecting their reproductive and their immune systems.
So what can we do to reduce those threats to the orcas, and what has the Alliance, the Georgia Strait Alliance, been doing to get our coastal communities involved in part of the solutions?
So to turn the tides on the trajectory of this population, we really need to address threats in the very short term, so immediate urgent actions, midterm and long term. And the number one threat to the population right now is a shortage of food. Scientific research and observations show that the southern resident killer whales are actually starving to death. And so for Georgia Strait, we are calling on the government to do strategic closure of Chinook salmon fisheries to get food in the water right now, and then work on things like a vessel disturbance and contamination for the medium and long term.
And the vessel disturbance is a big one because, of course, the way that orcas communicate through their echolocation. So any marine traffic is very disruptive to them, is it not?
It can be, especially in times of low prey abundance. So Center for Whale Research does talk a lot about how when there's lots of Chinook in the water, those types of impacts aren't as heavy on the whales. But when we are in times of lean Chinook, then things like vessel traffic and boat noise from all around them can affect their navigation and their ability to hunt. And with our waters having an increase in tanker traffic and big freighters, it is a definite concern for the population.
Now, we talk about the resident orcas, but there's also transient orcas. And we've got a really good video here from our executive producer, Annette Lucas, that we're going to show here. Just talk to us, Rachael, about the difference between the 2 species, because there's very distinct differences, isn't there?
There are. So when we talk about southern resident killer whales, resident refers to the population that's only consuming fish. Transient killer whales, on the other hand, are mammal hunters only. So in our area, they like the sea lions and the seals. Transient and resident killer whales have completely different cultures, different languages, and they will never interbreed. On our coastline alone, the genetic work shows that those 2 populations have not interbred for a minimum of 750,000 years. So they've become very different populations.
Very different, yeah. And so our resident orcas rely on salmon Chinook is one of their favorite snacks. How's the salmon run been this year, 2017, for the orcas?
2017 is showing to be one of the lowest returns of Chinook salmon to the lower Fraser River in recorded history. And this has been a trend over at least the last decade where we have very low runs. And we know that there's a correlation between mortality rates in the southern resident killer whales following years of low Chinook.
Wow. That's shocking.
That's very serious.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Now, the federal government has put together an action plan on how to help with this with the situation here with the ecosystem in the Georgia Strait. What elements of the plan are good and what need more attention in your view?
The plan put forward by the government does not have a lot of concrete actions that describe exactly what they're going to do. It does include a lot of science and research. And so what we want to see is what the actions are going to be, who's going to do them, when, and who's going to do the budget for it exactly. You know, who's going to pay for everything and how they're going to do it and when.
It doesn't appear to be addressing the urgency, because I mean, if you say this is the lowest, I mean, they're starving, and more research isn't needed. I don't think more planning is needed. I think, as you say, we need a little more action here to help out these incredible marine mammals.
Exactly. The whales don't have time for more research. Research is always a good thing, but right now what they need is fish in the water. And so we are really hoping that the government does come out with a clear plan in the next couple of months so that when spring starts and the whales should be returning to our area to feed on all those spring Chinook, that there is a plan in place to allow that to happen.
Yes. Now, the Georgia Strait Alliance, you folks do a lot of really good work here to rally coastal communities to help out. And you also have the Orca Action Team, say that 3 times, that you head or work with the volunteers and staff there. Talk to us a little bit about the Orca Action Team, what it is that you folks do.
So the Orca Action Team is part of our campaign to help protect and recover the southern resident killer whales. And by joining that team, we are able to give those members updates on exactly what we're doing and then also provide them the avenues to take action themselves. So if we have something like a petition or a letter writing to your government officials, that allows us to communicate with our members, and then we can find out what they would like to do to help.
And your website, georgiastrait.org, is a really good source of information for our viewers as well. You've got a really good newsletter on there, Strait Talk. And there's a lot of wonderful photos, and there's ways that people can get involved. You're also a not-for-profit organization, and I'm sure that cash donations wouldn't be turned down either.
Yeah, as any NGO, definitely, when we have donations, that does go right back into our programming, and it allows us to do all kinds of projects on this coastline, and mine specifically being right now on the southern resident killer whales.
As far as whale sightings this year, Rachel, and you actually live on the water, you live on a boat, so you're front and center for any viewings that there might be. How has the orca sightings been this year?
So according to the Center for Whale Research, who has been studying this population for 42 years off San Juan Island, 2017 has the lowest recorded sightings of southern residents in their core summer habitat, so around Vancouver Island and then the Gulf Islands and the San Juans, that they've ever seen. So we're at 40 days between April through the end of September where at least some of the southern residents were seen. And to give you kind of the impact of that, in 2014 there were 150 days with the whales in that area.
Wow. So no salmon, no orca.
Yeah, that's exactly it. If we don't have fish here, we're not going to have killer whales here.
Because there's nothing else that they're going to be feeding on. They're going where the food is.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're following the food chain.
Yeah, and we know that salmon runs up and down the coast have been depleted for all species, but especially on Chinook. And it doesn't appear that the whales are finding food in other places because the observations are showing that the whales are severely underweight.
Wow. So if there's no sightings, where are they going?
That's the mystery.
Yeah.
We don't know. I've actually looked into sightings right from basically Alaska to Washington over the summer to see if I could get some data on that, and I just can't find anyone who's spotting the southern residents.
That's shocking. I mean,
Very concerning.
very concerning.
Yeah. Part of the problem too is that the pods aren't just not showing up. When we do see them, they're becoming fragmented. And this is something the Center for Whale Research hasn't seen in over 40 years. And what I mean by fragmenting is just that the pods are made up of multiple matrolines. And instead of all of J-pod coming in, we're seeing just the J16s or just the J14 family. And so they're having to split up to try to find enough food, and that definitely has a negative impact on the social structure of this very cultural species.
And very familial. They're very intergenerational.
Yeah.
And now they're having to split up to just survive.
Exactly. And we know that even in human studies, when you have to be split up from your family and friends, it can have detrimental effects on your health, which is predicted to be the same with the southern residents.
They're grieving, they're mourning, they're missing each other. Yeah.
Yes, J-pod has lost 7 whales in about 18 months. And so, yeah, we do notice that the pod does seem subdued and almost, they have this lost appearance to them. And with the loss of Granny, their matriarch, last year, it seems to be having a very awful effect on the family.
Wow, this is a very sad story. You know, it's for anybody on the coast, I mean anybody on the planet, to hear that this is happening with our orcas is staggering, actually. Yeah. And there's so much we can do to prevent it. Let's meet some of your family members here. You've got, Rachael, you've collected some really good pictures of your orca sightings of your family members. And we're just going to pop them up on the screen. You've got some stories that you can tell us about your family.
Absolutely, that's what they are. So you're looking at a picture right now with the whale in the front is Granny, who passed away last year. And she was the oldest known southern resident and possibly the oldest known killer whale in the world. We believe that Granny was 105 when she passed away. So she's an icon not only for the population, but of this species. And behind her is a whale named Onyx. And Onyx is a favorite on the coastline because he's the only known killer whale who has actually switched pods. So he's actually an L-pod whale. Granny is a J-pod whale. But when Onyx lost his mother in 2005, he started traveling with the matriline of K-pod, and her name was Lummy, and she was very old as well, born in 1910. And he was only with Lummy for about 3 years before she passed away. He attached to her daughter, Georgia, and unfortunately by 2010, Georgia had passed away. And that's when Onyx joined J-pod, and he sought the comfort of a really old female named Spiden, and she was Granny's best friend. She didn't have any other living family, so no offspring, no grandchildren, no sisters. And whenever you saw Spiden, you saw Onyx pop up. And we did again lose Spiden, and so Onyx attached to Granny after that. And so this whale's had his mother and 4 adopted mothers, which really speaks to the social cohesion of this population and how they bond with each other and take care of each other. Since Granny's passing, we've had such few sightings of J-pod that we don't really know who Onyx is hanging around, but we do know that he's still traveling with them.
And how old is Onyx now?
He's 25.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
So it's a very important time. He's just becoming a mature male and hopefully starting to contribute to the genetic pool of the family.
Because a mature male will live, what, about 80, 85 years? Is that sort of the average lifespan?
That's for the females.
The females.
See into the 80s or above.
Yeah.
Males, the average life expectancy could be between 40 and 60 years. The oldest southern resident male we ever had was J1 or Ruffles, and he was a favorite, and he passed away when he was 59.
And these whales are huge. I mean, they're 6-8 tons, are they not? Full-grown male. Yeah.
We do know that the southern residents in particular are a little bit smaller than average, and that may have to do with food shortages and that they're not growing as much as other whales. They're definitely a lot smaller than transients right now. But yeah, we do get females in around the 18 to 21 feet and 4 to 6 tons, and then our males reaching up to about 8 tons.
Beautiful. And our next family member in our album here, who have we got coming up here, Rachel?
Oh, that is actually a picture of Granny in the sunset. Something you can really see from this photo is how Granny was identified so easily. If you look in the back edge of her dorsal fin, she has this kind of half-moon nick, and her saddle patch is very solid. And so she's always in the front, and then you look for that nick, which is very prominent on the water.
Nice. And that's another difference between the transients and the residents, is that the patch around the dorsal fin, is it not? Yeah.
Yeah, the genetics in resident killer whales, so whether it's northern or southern on our coastline, have the genetic spread to have either what we call a closed saddle patch, so it's just solid white or solid gray, or they can have what we call an open saddle patch, so it has some kind of black shape running through it. Whereas transients, the genetic diversity only allows for solid saddle patches. So if you're out watching whales and you just see one whale where you can see some kind of shape in the saddle patch, you know you're with resident killer whales.
Interesting. And our next family member that we've got coming up here, I think we've got to see, there we go.
Oh, this is a picture, I believe, is of J-pod on a fairly rough day out on the water. You can tell how it's very choppy. And we often see them pack up like this, where they're almost touching each other as they swim. And they are doing sort of a high-speed swim here, and you can really see them punching their heads above the waves. You can see that eye patch, just to make sure their blowholes have that clearance from the water to exhale and inhale.
Beautiful. And how big are the pods with the resident whales? How big can they get?
We don't really know because of what's happened to this population over time. Right now, we have 23 members in J-pod, 18 in K-pod, and 35 in L-pod. So it just depends on the dynamics. Northern residents tend to have more pods, but fewer members in each of their pods.
And again, the transients have fewer numbers. They'll have 2 or 3 or 4 in their
we usually
pods.
see an average anywhere from 1 to about 7 transients, and that has a lot to do with what they're eating. They have to be quite stealthy when they're hunting mammals. So if you have lots of whales, you're probably going to get detected earlier. And so we tend to see them in those just matrilines instead of a pod.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And another photo we're going to pop up here in a second, Rachel.
Oh, this is one of my favorites. At the time, this is a whale named Joy. She's L119. And in this photo, she was 3 years old. And what I love about Joy is that she actually is the exact definition of her name. She just exudes joy. She's known for breaching and playing. But in this photo in particular, if you look on her belly there, on the white part, you can see a bull kelp. And so what she's done is she's put the one end in her mouth, and then it's all across her body there. And then she's actually hooked it in her tail in the little center notch.
It's like a zipper.
Yeah. The night I seen this, or in the evening I saw this, I was worried she actually had fishing line.
Sure.
So I was zooming in, and then I saw this bull kelp, and I think we stopped counting after 30 breaches, where she would just jump and jump
in
and jump.
one session.
Oh, yeah, that's back to back.
Wow.
And that's Joy's personality all the time. She's 5 now, so.
She's 5.
Yeah.
And you look at that photo and it just brings you joy.
Oh, yeah, that's what she does.
She's gorgeous. Okay, who have we got up next here, Rachel? One more. I think we have about 3 more to show our viewers.
Oh, this is a juvenile male from K-pod, and I just kind of love this photo because it really captures how graceful killer whales are and how beautiful they really look in the water. And I think when people are on the water and sharing that time and space with them in moments like this, you really develop that connection to them.
Beautiful. And I think we have another one to show our viewers.
Oh, so this is Mega, or known as L41, and he is actually now our oldest and largest male in the population. He's what we are part of the family called the L12 matriline. So L12 was Alexis, or his grandmother, and she's passed away now, but they're still named after her. And Mega is easily identifiable because that front edge of that dorsal fin really curves in, where a lot of males it's straight, and then you can see those 2 big nicks in that back edge.
Oh, yeah. Very distinctive.
And some genetic work has come out with this population and looking at who the fathers are of a lot of the whales. And it turns out, with Mega being one of the oldest, he has sired a lot of the offspring in the population that exists now, along with Ruffles, who again passed away in 2010. So, yeah.
Nice. So, Rachel, how did we get to the point of starvation for these beautiful mammals? How did that happen? I mean, Granny is 102 years old, so in the last century, she was able to survive and thrive very well, almost, up until the last couple of decades. Yeah.
I think why salmon are depleted is not due to just one factor. There are a combination, but we do know at the turn of the century, we were seeing several million Chinook enter the Fraser River, and now we're just at a bare fraction of that. So I think there has definitely been a mismanagement in our fisheries. I think the proof is in the pudding. We don't have fish. Then we have to look at things like climate change and how that's affecting the fish. We have to look at the problems we've had with dams on rivers in both Canada and the United States, blocking salmon from their spawning habitat. The degradation of the spawning habitat itself, with the clear cutting to forest edge, dumping of chemicals. So we're losing that spawning habitat, or we have lost it. And then there are other factors like what the farm salmon is, the impacts it's having on our coastline and our wild Pacific salmon from these farmed Atlantic salmon. And something that's come out just recently is that we're having issues with the floodgates that are on the Fraser River, which have doors on them. And when the doors are open, fish can pass through, and they should be open unless we're in times of flood. And Simon Fraser University just came with a study saying that those doors are only working about 10% of the time. So there's a lot of different factors playing into why we're losing salmon. And we need to address them on all fronts if we want to have salmon now and in the long term for everyone, not just the killer whales, but for the sport fishermen, for our First Nations communities.
Birds, all kinds of other mammals.
We've got our bears, even our forests are dependent on the nutrients from salmon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that, as an individual, that I can do to help turn the tide on this? What are some small steps that I can take? Things that I'm doing in my daily life that I shouldn't be, or joining up and doing something with the Alliance? What are a few of the action steps that we can take?
So there's a few things that you can do right at home that are really easy, and that can be making sure that you do not dispose of any unused medication down your sink or in the toilet or the garbage. Take them to a pharmacy. It might seem like a small thing, but when millions of people do that, it's creating an impact on the fish and the mammals that eat those fish. We always say ditch the balloon. Balloons end up being one of the most toxic types of pollution in the oceans. Other animals ingest them, and they can either suffocate or starve to death because they get caught in the digestive tracts. And then what's been in the media quite a bit lately is microplastics. And so if you can try to avoid having clothing that's made from synthetic fleece and then the polyesters, because every time you wash those, microplastic is going into our oceans and into the food, which you and I eat, and not just the whales. If you want to do something a little bit more bigger and impactful, we do recommend that you talk to your elected officials, and whether that's sending them an email, giving them a phone call, or showing up at their office, and tell them that you care about this population and you think it's important that we set them as a priority. They're important to all of us, and they're important to this coastline. We do recommend, if you can get involved in any habitat restoration for salmon, lots of different organizations that have those events, so if you can sign up and do that helps them out. And of course, supporting organizations that are working on salmon recovery and southern resident killer whale recovery.
All really practical steps that we can take, and I did not know that about the fleece. When you wash that, how that gets into the water, and the microplastics from that. Did not know that.
Yeah, they're starting to do a lot of studies on it now and finding those in fish. And then, those fish move up the food chain and they're becoming concentrated in top predators like southern resident killer whales.
Great tips, Rachel. What any events that the Georgia Strait Alliance has coming up in the next few months that the viewers might want to know about as we're wrapping up here?
Yeah, we are specifically for the orcas. We are sort of working on a plan with some of our allies of all the actions we want to take, and so basically, what the best thing to do is to get on the Orca Action Team so that I can send you those updates and give you locations and times. But we do have some events coming up for protection of the Salish Sea, both in Vancouver and Victoria, and addressing a lot of the issues with tanker traffic and oil spills. So if you do want to attend those events and get some more information, definitely head to the website and you can find out where the location is nearest to you.
And I just want to talk briefly about oil spills too. If people see an oil spill, a marine spill, there's an 800 number, 1-800-OILS-911 they can call to make sure those spills are cleaned up as quickly as possible as well.
Yes, always good to report any kind of spill, even if you think it's minor. It could have very big effects. It could be farther down in the water column. So yeah, absolutely report any oil or fuel you see on the water.
Okay, very good. Rachel, any closing thoughts as we wrap this up? Our Orca Defender?
Just that the orcas need action now. They cannot wait. So if there's anything that you can do, it's get involved, be a voice, because they don't have a voice. So yeah, I ask you, be a voice for our orcas.
Thank you, Rachel. Thanks for coming out tonight on this very, very stormy Vancouver Island night.
Thanks for having me.
To defend the orcas. And we really appreciate the work that you are doing with the Georgia Strait Alliance. And we'll have you back for an update, and hopefully we'll have some better news to share with our viewers about the plight of the orcas.
I hope so too.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And thank you for joining us here on Coast Connections. And we encourage you to log on to georgiastrait.org and get involved. We've been speaking with Rachael Merrett from the Georgia Strait, and she's the Species at Risk Coordinator. Thanks for joining us.